America's infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our railways have been falling apart for decades. The situation has gotten so bad that a new report says most areas are in complete disrepair. Last week's Amtrak disaster has put the issue of infrastructure back on the table, and I have Howard Nations here to tell us how we can prevent the next catastrophe. Howard, 7 dead in Philadelphia Amtrak disaster, and it really has to do, if you follow the money, you can follow it right to the foot of Republican politicians who want, and really don't seem to care that the infrastructure in America is crumbling. They are responsible. There's no way for them to say they aren't. What's your take on it?
Well, the Amtrak crash is a fine example of the high cost of ignoring the infrastructure. Train goes in at 50 miles, has 50 mile an hour speed limit, traveling at 106 miles per hour. An engineer says he has no recollection of what happened. For years, National Transportation Safety Board has been begging for this positive train control, which the gentleman who's head of the investigation said if that positive train control had been in effect, this would not have occurred. This was mandated in 2007. It's already on the train, but it was scheduled to be put on the tracks in late 2015. But because of budget cuts, they said it wouldn't have happened by late 2015 either. So Robert Sumwalt says this positive train control is on our most wanted list. It has been for years, and it's just it's absurd that we don't have it.
Howard, put in perspective what's happening in the U.S. right now. You see, wealthy people, they don't use Amtrak. They fly a jet, so therefore Amtrak's not important to them. There's this class distinction that is articulating itself by way of how we budget various things. Public transportation is unimportant here compared to China. I think, what do we put in our public transportation compared to what a place like China might be spending?
Well, what we did, this is an amazing figure, but right now in the National Journal last week, there's an article called "Why Can't America Have Great Trains?" It showed that the House of Representatives has authorized 4 years of funding of $1.4 billion for rail in America. China this year alone, $128 billion for rail. And then the response of the House of Representatives, they cut the $1.4 billion for the next 4 years down to $1.1 billion. So they just simply don't understand that infrastructure creates wealth. I remember back in the 1950s and 60s, Eisenhower understood this. He built the interstate highway system. 3% of the gross domestic product was used per year to build the airports, the highways, the bridges, all the things that are falling apart now, but we've had 60 years of use. Now we have 0.3. 1/10 as much is spent now as was spent in the 50s. It's amazing.
The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that just to get our infrastructure, our roads, as you point out, our bridges, our Amtrak, just to get it back to usable kind of quality, it would cost us $3.6 trillion because the Republicans for the last 65 years have fought so desperately to make sure that they don't really care if that infrastructure crumbles. Howard, isn't it the gated community kind of notion? Same thing we see with everything with the 1% and above that, and it is they have their schools. Why worry about the schools for the people on the other side of the wall, the other side of the gates, like a Mad Max movie? Oh, they have their roads in their nice neighborhoods, and when you do the analysis, it's startling to where the wealthy people live. That's where the nice bridges are, the roads are. So they don't really care about people on the other side of that Mad Max wall. Isn't that very clear what's happening in the United States right now?
That is definitely very clear what's happening. You remember President Obama, as candidate Obama, came in and talked about the shovel-ready jobs that were going to produce 1.8 million jobs for people to work on improving infrastructure. Instead of that, what he got out of the Republican Congress was slashed funding. They have no political sense. Now we have currently negative spending for the last 7 quarters. That is to say, the infrastructure is depreciating, faster than they're rebuilding it. Larry Summers came in when he was advising President Obama economically and said it's absolutely the perfect time to rebuild the infrastructure when you have 3% investment cost. And he tried to explain that investment of infrastructure puts millions of people to work, it boosts productivity, it improves international competitiveness, and it just brings us back to a very strong position on so many different levels. But the fact of the matter is, we simply won't do it because the only economics that Congress is concerned with is campaign finance, the economics of getting reelected.
Well, and really the tragedy here is that if you take a look at the way that corporate media handles this issue, they don't really show you this issue we're talking about, what I call the Mad Max wall. That is that the wealthy are going to be okay. They're going to have their private police departments. They're going to have their transportation. They're going to have their nice roads and nice bridges. But it's this division, this economic division in America that is actually playing itself out even in the way we have to view the infrastructure. Let me shift here just a second. Right now, on any given day, we could collect something like $400 billion that's just being held offshore by some of these corporations in the wealthiest Americas. Apple, GE has billions of dollars offshore that could solve this problem by this leadership, by this president saying, you know what, we're not going to tolerate that anymore. I'm going to take some action. Give me your take on this contrast here.
Well, the whole thing came up in 2004 when you have all this money placed offshore where corporations are placing their profits and holding their profits offshore so they don't have to pay taxes on it. President Bush in 2004 came up with this idea of a tax holiday. That is to say, they would allow them to bring their money back into the country and give them massive savings on the taxes on that money. Corporations saved $100 billion in taxes. The theory was that if they brought that money back into the United States, they would invest it in the economy. The fact of the matter is, what they did was they bought their stock back, they boosted dividends, they laid off workers, and they increased the wealth gap. They immediately began offshoring again, and the offshoring between 2005 and present date has increased by 20-fold. And now the Congress is saying, well, gee, that was fun. Why don't we do it again?
We could actually pay for the disaster of the infrastructure with that money. In about 20 seconds, what's your take on the leadership that Obama has shown by trying to make something happen? Give me your quick on that.
Well, Obama's able to come up with money to rebuild Afghanistan, trying to bring it up to the 12th century. They can come up with $1 trillion to fight the war in Iraq. He can come up for money that they need for everything else. But Obama ran on infrastructure. He ran on producing jobs.
And we're not seeing it.
The fact of the matter is, it hasn't happened.
We're not seeing it. Howard Nations, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Pap.